Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai. Welcome back to the Power Hub podcast. Today, I am joined by the fabulous Tara Lorigan. Now, Tara is a visionary leader and a disruptor in champion women's success and a passionate high-performance proponent. She had a career in tech marketing across both Aotearoa and the UK, and that featured senior roles with global giants like Apple, IBM, Sun, and 3Com. In 2012, she founded Co.OfWomen. She hosts the DNA of Women's Success podcast, and she has also been honoured as a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit. For her contributions to business and women, Tara, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here on the show this morning. Kia
Kia ora. Stoked to be chatting with you, Jess. Thank you very much for inviting me onto the show.
It's an absolute pleasure. I'm really excited to get into kōrero and looking at this expanse of experience you've had, not just across different countries, but particularly in the tech industry, which I guess has changed so much over that time or evolved so much, and the things you've gone on to do since then. I'm interested to know kind of what have you seen change over the years, and what have been some of the biggest sort of hurdles, I guess, that leaders in that sector have had to overcome, including yourself?
Well, look, I think it's quite a long time since I was in the tech sector. It was really where my career started, and it was absolutely a classic male-dominated environment. But I was both, I think, too naive/young, and I also lucked out from having some really incredible male mentors. So I guess I would have noticed the differences in how men and women were being treated, but it was definitely not talked about. And it was often a case of where the women were not particularly helpful. I've been gone from that environment for a really long time. And I think one of the things that punctuates that particular time, which was the 90s into the early noughties, was that there was really no conversation about gender, certainly no conversation about diversity to include all of the other, humans and our expressions. So everyone just kind of got on with it. And I think that the bad behavior that I was alluding to about other women was really a best endeavor response to the environment that was really not in our favor. Certainly not if you wanted to, get into more senior roles.
Yeah.
But for me, as I say, I did actually have really fantastic male champions almost exclusively at that time.
Nice. Yeah, fabulous. And I think one of the things you touched on just then is something that continually comes up, certainly in the work that I see, around women having to feel like they need to change something about themselves in order to fit the environment around them or to get ahead. And I think, yes, that's changed over the years, but I'm interested to know, obviously, we have different iterations of ourselves as we evolve through our career. How have you been able to do that with your own career whilst also staying true to who you are and being able to be authentic?
Oh, look, the word authentic was a mystery to me for a really long time because, I'm a true Gen X, that kind of crossover generation where we both were told that we weren't welcome at the table and thought that maybe there could be a possibility that we might be able to find a way. But our socialization, which is a gendered socialization, it wasn't just our generation, but we had a particular inflection or expression that really made us invisible to ourselves, is how I would describe it, Jess. And so for me, I was every inch that entity as a young woman and coming into my career, going through my career. It took me the longest time to really, what I call, come home to myself and to my power, which is a return to self-belief as a default. So it feels to me that that's actually quite a new thing in my life. And the journey that I've gone on is ultimately what allowed me to understand what was going on for me, because in being the founder of an organization like Co.OfWomen, I did that oblivious, rather, I founded it oblivious to really what was going on, but with enough curiosity to be interested, and then eventually enough time to dedicate to really getting under the hood of this, what was very much a collective response to life, that maybe I'm not enough, maybe I won't be enough. And all sorts of tools like fake it till you make it, which I did as much as I needed to, which was frequently, because there was no understanding. Even the champions who I had that were guys, they had no idea why I lacked confidence or self-belief. So I think it did take a very long time, and my I suppose my evolution is, I guess it's evolution in some ways, but it is really that return to yourself, that that strength, that power that was always there, but that was so clouded over through who I was told to be. So it actually honestly feels like that's a last 5 years of my life experience, Jess, and I'm level 59 and a half right now.
Nice.
So that tells you that it was a struggle for the biggest part so far, but I'm intending to live at least that again if I can. So now I get to actually do it on my terms.
Nice, nice. And it's so familiar, that story that I see in so many journeys of, that fighting against everything that we are, trying to be someone different, constantly underestimating ourselves to get to that point where you're like, oh, it's been there all along. And that sudden kind of realization of like, oh, no, I am enough. I do have a lot to give. And who I am is exactly okay, just as I am. And I think it's so refreshing and relieving. And yet, I don't think we can get to that point without going through that struggle and that journey before it. I mean, it would be nice, I think, if we would, because we do tell women so often, hey, just be yourself. You're so amazing. Why can't you see this? And yet, we're all going through this similar journey that you've so beautifully explained. Were there any kind of turning points or experiences or moments in that last kind of 5 years that really helped unlock that? When you think about this concept of sort of, returning to yourself, are there any moments that you can put your finger on or experiences that have helped enable that to happen?
Yeah, and look, I am really passionate about the piece that, yes, our best selves are revealed often through walking through what we would call challenging / hard times / obstacles, but it doesn't need to take as long, actually. And so really understanding, there's a positioning that we have at Co.OfWomen, and we call it the how-to of success, that we don't want things to be a mystery, whether it's how to write a marketing plan, how to negotiate a salary, or actually how to activate self-belief when it seems suddenly that it's disappeared. So I think, not that I intended to be the default version of any person, but I knew that as a founder of Co.OfWomen, I would have to prove that it was possible to happen. And for years, I didn't even think about it. When I started to think about it, I didn't know if it was possible because I'd spent so much time not in that version of myself. But there are definitely things that really I guess, stopped me. One of them is the collective research that I've done, and by research, what I mean there is by looking at the research that has been done by a lot of incredible women, particularly in the last 10 years. As I started to get under the hood of what is going on for women, I decided I wanted to read the most modern literature. And so it took me a while, but that helped. I am not suggesting for a second that anybody needs to read as many books as I've read, because I've probably read close to 100 books just that relate to that topic. You don't need to, but I think understanding how humans are socialized was a really important moment, that gender socialization happens when or in vitro, right? So before you're even born, expectations of you, depending on what determined or known gender, it begins very early on. And that for gender, if we just make this binary at the moment, expectations are very different. That for girls, the expectation is that our job is everyone else. And Kate Mann describes the socialization of women as gifting something called human giver syndrome. So she says, and Kate's a researcher, she's written a number of books. And so understanding that this reflex to ensure everybody else is fine, to be virtually blind to my own needs, and not only my own needs, certainly my own brilliance, and definitely even my capacities. This is one of the majors. And so as I really started to understand about socialization, it became very obvious to me why, as a collective, women tend to show up in the world in particular ways. So I have to say that was probably a major. And again, while I took a long time to really understand it, it does not need to take that long. What can take time after that is how you then start to behave differently and start to reclaim that power. And that's something that, again, can be supported and doesn't need to be done in isolation, for sure.
I think that's such a major, it's such a big one, and something I see play out continually. And that unpicking of that, particularly when you're in a society that tends to re-emphasize some of those gender stereotypes or gender roles. And I see it play out not just in terms of our whānau and everything, the mental load and everything resting on the female of that whānau, but also in our teams as well. We're conditioned to make sure everyone else is last on our own. We're last on our own list, and everybody else is first. And continually, we'll hear women suggest that I can't delegate. My team are overwhelmed. I have to pick up the slack, and I'm the one now that's burning out. And then, of course, you transition that to home, and I think we've still got this perception in our society that if you can't be at the school gates, if you've got kids at 3:00, you're failing. But if you can't be at the 5:00 meeting, you're failing as an exec as well. And I think women take so much of that internally in terms of that guilt, which I think then plays into that, am I good enough? And am I doing the best job I can? What are you seeing? Because you work very closely with a lot of senior female leaders. What are you seeing in that space as some of the biggest challenges?
So 100%, the number one challenge is this disconnection from self, and this capacity that we've built up to be able to go long and far just through sheer grit and determination, and the inability to do things like delegate, and to feel like we have to do more. So there's such a cocktail of expectation in there, because women are penalized for not caring, right? So not only can we barely stop ourselves looking after ourselves because we're so busy caring for everyone else, if we show up as non-caring or more like how a man might, we're also penalized for that. What I would say, though, is, and I've had a really interesting insight in the last 24 hours about how women's time is not their own, right? So I think you possibly know about me, Jess, that I didn't make any human babies. And so, however, I am hyper aware of the fact that having children or having a family plays a significant role on a woman's life. And so I think the absence of time to even be able to recognize what's going on is one of those things that's, if you kind of dig back into, we talk a lot about the symptoms, like, and this one cure or one diagnosis for all women, the words imposter syndrome, which kind of make me cringe because it's just an indictment on the reality that we don't even understand our own human experience as women, that we only have that word, that phrase to use. But it is compounded by lack of space for women on their own to think about. And as leaders, we're living in a time when few humans are finding space to do, rhythmic strategic reflective thinking. And the woman version of that leader is going to struggle even more. So you didn't ask me to do this, but it occurs to me that one of the things that we will be doubling down on, it's already built into our model, is the necessity for women to have reflection on how things are going. I had a session with a senior leader this morning, actually, before I came through to have our lovely chat. And she was essentially, what was at the heart of what was going on for her was, again, this busyness. She was feeling less than. She used the words imposter syndrome. She shared a range of other emotions that were going on for her. And it was clear that this was the first time she had space to think about it. So one of the things that we've built in to the bookends of her day, which is for most, not all, but for most, the only part of the day that we own, is some questions she can ask herself to really just check in with what is going on for me right now. Because we often don't know what's going on for us because we're too busy doing it for everyone else.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I think so much of what we talk about, whether it's disconnection from self, whether it's imposter syndrome, comes from the fact that we are so busy, we don't get the opportunity to acknowledge what we've achieved. Therefore, we don't feel we've achieved enough. We are overwhelmed because we're so busy, and therefore we feel like we're falling behind. And then, of course, you add on to that the exhaustion and additional stresses that come health-wise from being in that position. And yet, jobs and our roles in life are set up in a way that there's not a woman on this planet that is not busy. And so it's something that I talk a lot about with the burnout to brilliant stuff, this need for space. We think the busier we are, the more we'll achieve. And yet sometimes it's that slowing down that helps us speed up. And so creating that space, as you said, to reflect, to actually figure out what's going on, to provide that opportunity to connect with ourselves and what matters, but also figure out, what am I doing next? What's not working? What do I need to change? And unpick some of that stuff, relearn some of the stuff that, society and the expectations around our gender hasn't particularly supported us with. How do you do that? So, how do you create, because you're very busy, you've got a lot of responsibility in the work that you do, not just for yourself, but other women as well. How do you make sure that you stay ahead, that you stay well, that you're creating that space to reflect, to connect to yourself? What are some of your secrets?
Well, I think, like most of us, mine was the change really in how I live my life was brought on by my own burnout. And I know for sure it wasn't the only burnout I've had. It just happened to be the time that I stopped long enough and was, I guess I realized that if I kept going, I was probably going to be compromising something all by myself. So that time in my life I'm actually quite grateful for. And so I guess since then, so it's probably 8 to 10 years since that happened. And what I realized is that the number one consideration every day for me would be my energy management, that everything would start with my body. And that in energizing that enough to live my life, because that became the goal, being energized to live my life, then I would have better emotion regulation, that I would be more spiritually connected also as a consequence. So how I do that, Jess, is the very first thing I did is I changed the time of day I got out of bed. And this is, again, I'm acknowledging certainly that it was easy for me to do that. I can get up and leave the house and nobody is wondering where their breakfast is. So I don't share this by way of an example, but it is that, again, that principle of we own the bookends of the day. For me, the challenging part was if I got to work too close to when my team did, I just didn't get to do my job as the leader, and I knew that no one else was going to pick that slack up. So I got I got my workday started earlier and earlier, and the more I did that, the better my days went. In fact, it started to go well very quickly. But what I did in conjunction with changing time, because I didn't start early and then keep, finishing late, I actually pulled the whole day forward.
Yes.
Because I also decided that I asked myself the question, how much life would you like to have at the end of the day to live, Tara? Which, as a founder was just an outrageous question, What do you mean have a life? And it's part of that thing that you're so generally so in love with what you do that it is super easy to just keep going at it.
Oh, yeah.
But I realized that my life boils down to, company of women at one stage and pretty much nothing else. And it took me a while to regain it, but I decided that the goal was I would like 4 hours. 4 hours is what I would like between the end of the workday and bedtime. So I made that my goal. And the thing then inside of managing my time during the day that made the biggest difference was coming across the research of Katie Bowman. She's written a book that I highly recommend, but you can find her on YouTube and some of her videos are really great. And it's called Move Your DNA. And she's a biomechanic. And she talks about that our modern day selves are profoundly sedentary, regardless of what you look like or how often you go to the gym. It is the quantity of time we are immobile virtually, and that our entire physiology is suffering as a consequence. And so I built a rhythm of movement into my day right across the day consistently, which is something that I still do. And again, it's one of the pillars in terms of what we do working with leaders is energy. It's the high performance pillar, energy, time, and focus. And for me, that is the thing that's made the biggest difference. People find it inordinately hard to not sit down. And even I have had questions about, well, what will people think? I'm like, why would you wonder what people think? Move, be the high performer, exemplar in your world. Anyway, I don't want to diminish the challenge of environments and that there are practices that are deemed acceptable, and sitting down for a long time is one of them. However, it is also a super non-performing MO, and the great leap the great leap forward we made was with the standing desk, which was a marginal gain because for most people, you're just maybe moving from side to side, with the odd stretch. So it's better. It is not, the messiah of movement. So those would be things. I close the day off in reflection every day. I have a range of ways that I do that, but I want to actually draw a line under the day that was the work day. I do it by studying what was successful, excuse me. And then, and I address anything that's sort of hanging about, that stuff that wanted your attention all day, that it feels like the whole day didn't go well because, the brain will hang on to that stuff. Usually, because of the process I have, studying the success first and then coming to the thing that isn't resolved, it's easy to do that. That's about how brain chemistry resets with a little bit of dopamine, which is what studying success will do for us. And then I intentionally say to myself, how am I going to re-energize myself? So I'm literally actually seeing forward to the end of the day to when I'm going to get optimal sleep. And things that I will do to ensure that I get a really nourishing sleep. So I wake up, and the measure that all that I just described to you worked is in the morning I wake up and I think, let's do this.
Yeah, I love that. I love the notion that sleep starts well before we go to bed, that whole preparing ourselves to rest properly. And I think rest is something we don't get enough of, like space. We often think that space is time away from work, where I'm constantly saying to people, no, space is the work. You take the space to do all of the things you've described, and that is what makes everything better. And yet, so many of us are kind of waiting for permission for that to happen, or like you say, worrying about what others think. It's been fabulous to chat to you, Tara. What are you up to? So what's going on at the moment? How can people find out more about you and your work and what's coming up for you next?
Jess, can I say one more thing that I think
Definitely.
um, it just occurred to me before? I think that there is something that we call the bright side of women's socialization that relates to that overdoing piece, that we are so hardwired to ensure everyone else is okay. There is a bright side to that. This is why we overcomplicate the can I do it really well thing. So I just wanted to call that piece out, that there is something really wonderful driving the concern that women have, that we genuinely want to do it really well. We take the job of leading in particular really seriously. And this is one of the reasons why women as leaders are identified as more in so many of the measures than their male counterparts. So, and also to be clear, there is no one better gender, right?
Yeah.
You and I right now, we're talking a lot about women. But this is something that we don't talk often enough about. And I think that as I was chatting with this leader this morning, and she, all of the critiquing she had about her very harried life, the wonderful anecdote that Brene Brown uses, the story I'm telling myself is, right? This leader was feeling judged. She was feeling that people thought maybe she couldn't do certain things. This was entirely of her own making, right? And she did it instead of spending time saying, how am I going to shine in this particular project? What have I got to bring? And so on. But behind all of that was, I really want to do this well. And so I think we need to understand that nuance about ourselves. We do care, and we should feel really great about that.
Yeah, and we wouldn't want the opposite, right? We wouldn't want not to have this skill. It's such a critical skill. It's something I think that Jacinda Ardern touched on in her Yale address recently, around that shadow side of our strengths, and these are strengths, and we wouldn't want to be without them. And they cause some of those shadow sides around that self-doubt and that overwork and that wanting to give to others so much. And yet we also don't want to be without that, because it's part of what makes us great, particularly in leadership roles, right?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Coming back to your actual question that you put to me, the thing I'm most excited about at the moment, which we're going to be doing a soft launch on, with a goal of a big launch on International Women's Day 2026, is our self-assessment for women leaders. Part of, like I mentioned earlier, Jess, part of the challenge is, as women, we still don't really know what's going on for us. So we make it all about me. I remember how I used to talk about me and my lack of confidence, etc., was, that's just Tara Lorigan's version of crazy. That's just me. It's not everyone else. But actually, so much, yes, the expression was mine, but so much of it was everybody's. And how do you actually communicate that? Because even talking about feminism can be triggering in negative ways for many folks. Feminism just means equality. That is by certain measures that nobody would disagree with, we are equal. But actually, there can be a lot of challenges in just even talking about what distinguishes us as gender, what is great about both. But for women in particular, we carry that burden because of our socialization personally, and it doesn't need to be there. So the self-assessment is built sort of to model the three pillars that we have at Company of Women, which is about self, understanding the self. That's where we would look at socialization. The performance piece, which is about energy, focus, and time. And then acumen, which is about how do I, what do I need to do my job really, really well as a leader? And so this will be the only comprehensive self-assessment in the world that is designed for women. And
fabulous.
Yeah, it'll both educate, and then it will give you your appraisal against many dimensions. And imposter syndrome doesn't even appear in there. It's not a dimension because it's such a it's kind of a brutalized version of so many pieces, actually. And so we just don't want to give it any more oxygen, to be honest. So I am honestly most excited about getting that into the hands of women so that we better understand ourselves and, of course, have pathways to, doing the mahi that we each need to do to experience more of our power as our default.
Nice. That's super exciting. Love the sound of that. Where can people find you? So, if there's something you've that you've said today has resonated with people on the show, people interested in finding out more about the work of Company of Women, where's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, look, the website, absolutely. It's Co.OfWomen.biz. All the goods are there, or reach out to me anytime, Tara at Co.OfWomen.biz. No problem to do that as well.
Fabulous. And we'll put those links in the show notes as well. It's been an absolute pleasure, Tara, to chat to you, to hear your insights, your wisdom, bits about your journey and the things that you're seeing out there at the moment. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Jess.